good evening. Welcome to Consider This. I'm Melissa Idris. This is the show where we want you to consider and then reconsider what you know of the news of the day. Now, Winston Churchill once said, "We shape our buildings and afterwards our buildings shape us." Which is true. Almost all of us today live in constructed environments and we are affected by the spaces within buildings and between buildings. Now, it shapes our lives, our behavior, our social interactions, our ability to work, play, and to create community. So joining me on the show to talk a little bit more about the ins and outs of the architecture industry and its importance to livable society, joining me is Associate Professor Industry, Architect Sarli Adri Sarkum, President of the Malaysian Institute of Architects, better known by its Malay acronym PM, or Pertubuhan Arkitek Malaysia. And also Architect Almas Rahim. She is the convener of Singgah KL for the Malaysian Institute of Architects. Welcome to the show. It's good of you to join me today. And you know, in my introduction, I talked a little bit about the importance of architecture in our lives. But I think many of us don't think about it on a daily basis. We don't think about the shelter, the roof over our heads, the way our cities are configured. Maybe, Architect Sarli, you can begin by telling us a little bit about how you view the importance of architecture to community, to our lives.
I think many people understand architecture as the mother of all professions. And it is the basis of nation building, it's the basis of civilization. But the sad thing is that not a lot of people meet architects. Architects are always in the background. You get a building, it's already built. You get a hospital, it's already built. It's different from, say, a doctor, which you meet always, a lawyer, which you meet always. An architect always works in the background, actually shaping, as you well mentioned just now, how your cities would function, how your buildings would function, how these things interact in your life. So it is an integral part of what we do. Yeah. Historically, we also drive things like sustainability, we drive development, we drive economic progress as well, because the construction industry is something that is very important and affects all manner of strata of society. And as you well know now, housing has become a big issue, as well as prices for commercial properties and buildability of buildings in the city.
What about you, Architect Almas? Do you agree? I mean, do you see that people appreciate the profession, the contribution of architecture to the way we live our lives?
Like Architect Sarli mentioned, I mean, we're quite detached from the end users, but we work closely with people in the government, developers, building owners, but not the actual person using the building later. But our training, we are very conscious of social aspects of the building. The building is not just about concrete and bricks, but it's about spaces and how do spaces interact. And what are spaces for? Spaces are for people. So we actually have to understand who we are designing for so that we can give them the maximum use of that space and create spaces that are fulfilling and joyful and enriching, you know, in all aspects of buildings. So the man on the street might not understand what goes behind it, but from an empty sheet of paper, that's what we are trying to, we have to explore the needs of the end user, and although we don't meet them, to create that space.
So how exactly has the industry changed? You know, if you think about architecture in 2023, how has that changed in the last few decades, in the last 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, bearing in mind that we've all survived a pandemic, we've lived through a pandemic, and much of that, you know, the lessons that we learn will have to go back into the way we reconfigure, redesign our spaces. Architect Sarli.
I think something that we need to consider is not just architecture is about creativity and design, which is a fundamental thing about architecture, but it's also about liabilities. And here in Malaysia, the work of architects is very heavy in terms of liability, because as established with the Highland Towers case, when buildings fail, the local authorities cannot be sued in Malaysia. So it's different from, say, in the United Kingdom, where local authorities actually bear responsibility for certain buildings, you know, the safety of the building. But here it's totally the consultant. So if your building fails, the responsibility is the architects, the engineers, and all the consultants that are responsible. And that is why now, when you buy a house, you no longer get a CF, you get your CCC from the architect. Which is why, because the CF is from the traditional way, the CF is from the local authority. Now it's from the architects and the other consultants signing the CCC.
So what does that do to an industry, to the profession, if you are then, you have so much more liability? What does that do to an industry?
I think the architects don't mind because we are professionally trained to do such. But we need to ensure that our liability is covered properly, meaning that the remuneration for architects need to be handled with care. That means we have a scale of minimum fees. Hopefully everyone follows that scale. And people understand that it's not just about drawing or creating, it's also about ensuring people's lives and public safety as well.
Right. So you have to make sure you pay architects well so that they do the best job that they can and you get the best shelter, the best built environment that you can. Architect Almas, when we think about how, you know, your personal observations, your experience in a local context for Malaysia, I'm sure the industry has grown, has progressed. But where are the biggest challenges do you see for potential for improvements or course correction, shall we say?
Well, it's always progress. From the time I started work as an architect, as a student architect, I was drawing by hand. And then we progressed on to softwares, you know, drawing softwares, AutoCAD. And now we're moving on to 3D BIM softwares that we actually when you input the dimensions, etc., into the computer, you're actually coming up with the modeling. You can actually see the 3 dimensions straight away as you design. So there's a lot of progress in this sense, but also it's heavy cost. You see, so there's the cost of the hardware, the cost of the software, the cost of the training of the person using the computers. So these are the things that we have to embrace. There's no choice about it.
Right.
But in our case, we need our other consultants to embrace it as well. We cannot just be the one consultant that is proceeding with BIM development, you see. We've got to get everybody in.
Also local authorities.
What do you mean by that? As in the industry body is progressing, is embracing technology, but you need the entire ecosystem to also embrace it. Are they slower to react to advancement in technology?
I think because Malaysia, we have a 3-tier system. We have the federal, we have the state, and we have the local authorities. So at each level, they can actually enact their own laws. Like local authorities can have their own laws. So at the moment, if KPKT actually enacts something, that does not mean local authorities do it. So the problem with adoption of new technologies and policies with regard to building permits, you know, making building permits faster.
So sorry to interrupt you. The architecture industry, is that more, who are the stakeholders that you deal with? Is it at federal level or is it almost always at the state level?
It's both.
It's both,
I
see. Okay.
So we try to effect policy at the federal level, but of course when we submit drawings, it will always be at the local authority level. And these local authorities may not want to adopt the latest bylaw changes, the latest technological changes, which makes our country very uncompetitive. For example, if you go to Singapore, you can submit a plan and get it approved within 7 days. But in Malaysia, the minimum is like 6 months or to a year.
Oh, wow.
Wow, yeah. So if you are a foreign investor having FDI, you know, you want to build a factory here, 200 million USD, where would you want to build? You want to build a country which is faster, like Thailand or Vietnam, which is easier to get building permit, or you want to build here where you have to wait 6 to 12 months for building approval. So it does affect our country's competitiveness in the overall. There have been efforts by the government. It's very difficult without very, very strong political will to change this.
Okay, can I just continue on that note of competitiveness? Where would you say our local talent sits within the global scheme of things? How competitive are we in terms of our talent, our capacity of local architects to compete for global jobs or even local jobs, architect Almas?
I would say that our architects are equal to foreign architects or global architects, because we've got architects who are working overseas and doing very well. That's why it is unfortunate that some of the movers and shakers of the industry prefer to bring in foreign architects, because we believe that we are more than able to handle the projects.
I mean, I think our current KL skyline proves that we have the local talent, but there are projects that are being commissioned to foreign architects. Is that been the case that you're seeing, architect Arlie?
Yes, I think that the problem is, I think some of our big companies, even government, is still stuck in this foreign is better kind of thinking, because they don't understand that Malaysian architects were leading the world. We have the president for the Union of International Architects, past president, is a Malaysian. The current Secretary General for the Union of International Architects, which is the global body of all the architect bodies around the world, it's like a UN, is Malaysian. And we have half the architects in Singapore probably Malaysian. So we are having a brain drain because people are going out. Our best talent are going out because they're employing the same companies to come back and work in Malaysia. So it doesn't make sense sometimes.
So what would you do to change the perception, to highlight the fact that Malaysian talents are great? Why not consider a Malaysian architect for a big project? I know that some of the recent big projects have gone to foreign architects. What would you do to convince them to look locally?
I think the biggest push that we as an institute want to do is that we want to make all procurement via open architectural competition. So that doesn't mean it's open to all. So it's purely on merit, purely on the design. So if you are a young architect, an old architect, or a local, foreign, whatever, you can actually compete and we get the best design. So it's actually a win-win for the user, the stakeholders, and also for the architects.
Does that add another layer of bureaucracy, of time, of cost of doing business?
There is a cost for competition, but the results usually outweigh. We have tried to show that in our own building, the PAM Center, which is, we didn't, of course, being an institute, we don't have that much money. So we wanted to have a platinum-rated green building through competition. So we put out a nationwide competition, and it was actually won by a very young architect called Haikal.
This is the amazing PAM building in Bangsa. If you've ever driven past it, it's a beautiful black building there. We're going to take a very quick break here on Consider This. We're going to come back and continue our conversations with the good folks from Persatuan Architect Malaysia, Pertubuhan Architect Malaysia. We'll be right back. Stay tuned to Consider This. Hi, welcome back to Consider This. I'm Melissa Idris. Let's continue our conversation with the good folks from the Malaysian Institute of Architects, PAM. Architect Sarli Adri Sarkum is here in the studio with me, along with architect Almas Rahim. We're discussing the impact of architecture in creating communities, in fostering innovation, creation, connection, collaboration, everything you can think of about daily lives, but the challenges as well that the industry faces and the future of the architecture industry here in Malaysia. I want to talk a little bit about Singgah KL because for me it's quite fascinating. It's modelled after the Open House London Festival. It's aimed at making architecture accessible accessible to those who may not have considered it before, may not have had access to certain buildings before. So more accessible, more open, more equitable. It starts on the 4th and 5th of March. As convener of Singa KL, can you tell us a little bit more, Architect Amos?
Yeah, we have a committee within a PAM, which is called Promotion of Profession. And this was one of the projects that we embarked on in 2019 when I was in the committee. So we started with 7 buildings, and the whole idea is to get people to experience buildings designed by Malaysian architects, which otherwise they would not be able to. Normally, it's quite normal for people to open up architecture magazines and look at YouTube nowadays and walkthroughs and all that. But here, you have the architect and the building owner, or either or, to take you through, to give you a tour of the building, so that they are able to feel the spaces, you know. We've got buildings like the PAM building, that's definitely on the list. Like you said, you go to Nat Shambal, but you don't actually walk into the building, because you might say, oh, maybe it's a business building, so you might not feel.
So if I just may very quickly jump in, the idea is to have, so these buildings are there, people can access them, it's just the fact that most people don't, if they don't have an actual reason.
Some are not accessible.
Oh, some are not accessible. Can you give me an example of the ones that are not accessible? See, I would go to the PAM building because it's such a beautiful building, but I also would think it's a place of business. You know, it's working hours. I wouldn't want to intrude or interrupt and people's office space. But this would allow people to walk through and appreciate the built environments, right?
Yep.
We've got Genius Cornea Sentul, which is a special school for autistic children. Yeah. And that's not one building that anybody can just go unless your child is there. So this would be the second time the school is opening up for visitors. Yes. And for a first timer, we've got EQ, Equatorial, the new branded Equatorial Hotel, and they're going to take us to see places back of house, which you otherwise would not be able to see, even if you went to dine. Yeah. So
for example, there's a machine room on top of Equatorial that actually house all the chillers, and there's a crane there that they can actually lift all the equipment to the 40th floor. So there's a lot of secret behind. It's like a theater. You go backstage and that kind of thing.
Right.
So we're hoping not just architects would be interested, but hotel operators, hotel owners, people in food and beverage, who might be interested.
Afin Bank is.
Yes, we've got a new building on. They're keen to show their building, the Menara Afin.
In TRX.
TRX, they just came and said, look, can we show our building? And I think they're very proud of their building. So that's looking at biophilic design and sustainability, and we're looking forward to having them on board.
Banks don't usually open up their doors.
That's right. That's right. You wouldn't normally walk into a banking tower. So who are we targeting? You talked a little bit. So it's not just architects and industry players or service providers, people are interested in the building. How do we get this message down to the public, to people? Because there's a trickle-down effect, right? We talked a little bit at the start of the show that people often don't meet architects, don't appreciate what goes into the design and the thinking of creating a space. How do we translate that so that it's at a public level, it's at a mass population level? How can Singa KL translate that to the wider public?
That's what we're trying to do, opening up to the public so people don't feel intimidated about going to visit a building or a commercial building or institutional building, that they feel welcome because the invitation has gone out. Right. Come in, register and visit.
I think architecture is something that you need to experience. It's an experiential thing. Going into a mosque is different than going into, say, for example, a cinema, a theatre. You're going into, say, even a discotheque. there is a different feeling for each space.
Buildings speak to you.
Correct.
Right? Yes.
So there is a language, and that's why the study of architecture is very lengthy and very complicated. But I think we want to make this accessible to the public, and it is very apt because this year PAM itself is celebrating our 100 years of existence in Malaysia. So it's a very old profession.
That is amazing. I never considered the profession to be as old, predating even our independence as a country. It's quite remarkable. You mentioned a little bit. So, what lessons can you take from London, Open House London? That can be applied to Malaysian context or may not be applied to Malaysian context, because London's setting is very different, vastly different from a Kuala Lumpur setting. And a London public may not be as welcoming and open as perhaps a Malaysian public. Where do you see some of the synergy or similarities or things that need to be tweaked and learnt from, and also taking into account your previous experience in 2019?
Well, the London Open House is done by an independent company. It's not managed by RIBA,
the institute.
The industry body.
Yeah, the industry body. But we decided to take it upon ourselves to do that, to promote Malaysian architects. But I think the London Open House, they started, I think, with 4 buildings, but they've grown, to about 200 plus. But for us, I think the challenge is getting our architects to show off their buildings. I think our architects are a bit shy.
Oh.
They should come on board and show off their buildings.
Right.
So this is what I feel. But it's only the second year. We started at 7. We're hoping to double it.
And stopped a bit for MCO.
Yeah,
The pandemic disrupted, yes.
But we're hoping that people would see the benefit, architects and building owners.
Okay. All right. So in the last few minutes that we have left, I want to give both of you, I want to get your thoughts on, what you would like policymakers to understand about the way the industry has evolved till 2023, that they might consider intervening or creating more supportive policies for the industry. Architects, sorry.
I think the role of architects are very important in society today. So even at the ministerial level, perhaps it's time to have a national architect, for example, that actually oversees all the... we have bodies for town planning,
right,
but we don't have a body for architecture. So perhaps we need a body that oversees architectural design, architectural policy. Where is our identity, which has been spoken and debated in both academia and industry for so long. But
do other countries do that too?
Yes, they have ministries of design, for example. So,
ministries of design.
Yes. So we to be progressive, we need to establish something along that line, because our cities are the core generators of a lot of other things. So without the proper infrastructure and ecosystem, as you mentioned, it wouldn't function very well.
Architect Almas, any last words, thoughts for policymakers to consider tonight to better support the industry?
We want them to participate in Singgah KL. And come and look at the buildings and see what Malaysian architects do. There's no need to go and shop outside of the country, because I strongly believe our architects are really very talented.
So much talent in-house.
Yeah,
Let's look in-house.
Correct.
All right, I want to thank you both for joining me on the show today. It's been a pleasure chatting to you both.
Thank you, Melissa.
Thank you, Melissa.
That's all we have for you on this episode of Consider This. I'm Melissa Idris, signing off for the evening. Thank you so much for watching, and good night.